appropriate audiences. I try to say nobody under the age of 14, 13, somewhere around that, but even, these cases are pretty gruesome sometimes, so if you have any triggers with kids, killing, kidnapping, murder, just, you might want to pick a different video. So, this story, most of my information came from Mr. Keller, which I really enjoy doing cases from his books. I like his writing, and he's pretty thorough. And then I just add a little bit from there. This one, story number one, Heather Smith. So we can all remember our first love, I'm sure, and the intensity of it, the passion that our teenage brains thought that we were experiencing. However, we were not fully equipped to handle or comprehend what was going on. So instead of considering that we had the whole rest of our lives in front of us, that this was it, and it was the all, altruistic, wonderful, euphoric, everything that a teenage love would have, right? But we can remember the other side of that amazing love is the dark side. The first devastating breakup, when nobody or the other person would not call you back. And back in the 90s and 80s, or even earlier, we did not have cell phones or social media, so we had to sit and wait by the phone. Sometimes heartbroken that the love of our life at the time did not call us back. It feels like the end of the world, and it really does. It feels like we're alone. It feels like it's never gonna be better. But guess what? You grow up and you learn that it was no big deal. So the vast majority of us do recover, and we move on and love again. And this time in a more realistic way. I mean, even in later years, we can cast a nostalgic eye back on those, halcyon days. We realize that it was just a dress rehearsal for the real thing. It's really funny, I have to say this. My father, his first girlfriend was Debbie. And I know this because I hear about her all the time. He still has a pair of clippers, like nail clippers she gave him as a Christmas gift. So, even with my dad, who is very normal and calm in nature, well, not calm, but he's very normal as far as his thinking on relationships, at least for the most part, and yet here, his first love had given him a pair of nail clippers, and literally, I swear, he still has them. So that's how powerful, teenage love can be. That was the point of me telling you all that. But we realized that it was just a dress rehearsal for the real thing, the lives that we eventually Society at Spanaway Junior High School in Spanaway, Washington, in the United States. She often helped out as a teacher's aide and was also on the school gymnastics team. Classmates and teachers describe her as a pleasant but driven human being, a go-getter who has high standards for herself and seldom fell short of these imposed benchmarks. But in the fall of 1985, those in Heather's circle noticed a troubling change in her demeanor. The once bubbly teen had become decidedly downbeat, depressed even. She once confided in a friend that she was contemplating suicide and showed her scar on her wrist where she had cut herself. So obviously this girl has more problems than is showing on the outside, and sometimes when people are too perfect, it seems like, I'm not going to bring it up right this minute, but I can think of a couple cases that I think that had a huge part in. So this girl Heather is obviously, if it's not perfect, she feels like somebody's making her feel like she has to be perfect, or herself, she has to be perfect to be okay with herself, or she wants to kill herself. Her academic performance started to suffer as she turned into the first B of her high school career, her first B ever. She even spoke of bringing a gun to school and shooting her ex-boyfriend, 15-year-old Gordon Pickett. Of course, none of Heather's friends took this threat seriously, although perhaps they should have. I would have taken the fact that she had cut herself. First, I would have taken that seriously, and then the threat of her bringing a gun to school that's like the next level. So this girl is really suffering from this grade she got, this B. It is her grades, they make her who she is. So none of her friends are taking her seriously, even though she had cut herself and she's obviously very depressed. She's getting a B. Heather's depression, after all, had coincidentally and coincided with Gordon calling an end to the relationship, saying that things between them were getting too serious. Well, he didn't want to have the responsibility or the restrictions of having a boyfriend, even though I didn't do anything wrong. It's not like I was a cheater. I wouldn't go out. Maybe sometimes I wanted to be home and not have to worry about it. So I understand that. So he's saying that, Heather, this is getting too serious. Now she's taking that very personally, instead of thinking about her age and about where she is in life. He's probably thinking about going to college, and, why would he get off to college having a girlfriend? He would ask if they could downgrade the relationship, and Heather had at first agreed. However, it soon was apparent that Heather was taking the breakup badly. As we know, she's now gotten a B. She started to cut herself, and she's threatening to kill him. She's threatening a violence. She starts stalking Gordon. And an episode that saw both of them called into the guidance counselor's office for a sit-down. There they agreed to a truce, but then two events occurred that would shatter the agreement. First is that Heather discovered that Gordon was dating another girl. Then she found out that she was pregnant. wrestling team and planned on getting in some extra practice with his friends and teammate Chris Rico. Soon the pair of them would be out on the mat running through some moves. Heather, meanwhile, had traveled the short distance to her family's home, where she now sat at the edge of her bed, stewing in her situation. Brewing, she is pissed. She's pregnant. Her emotions, her hormones are going crazy. The first trimester is always nuts. She knew that she needed to do something and knew what that was. And yet, even now, she wondered if she could go through with it. But this is where Heather's innate sense of purpose kicked in. When something needed to be done that was ingrained in her character, getting up from her bed, she walked briskly to her parents' room. She rummaged through her father's closet, retrieving the .22 caliber semi-automatic rifle that was kept there. After checking that the weapon was loaded, she carried it back to her room. There she pulled out her coat and concealed the rifle under it. A short while later, she knocked on her neighbor's door and asked for a lift to the school, claiming that she left an important homework assignment behind. Can you imagine how bad the neighbor feels? Oh my gosh. So Heather has now arrived at the school. She walks, I can just see it, swinging, arms are swinging with purpose. She's walking towards the gymnasium. She knows that he is there. She removes the rifle from her coat, and she is fuming. Her face is red. She's probably sweating a little bit, and her hands are sweating, and she's holding on to that rifle. She removes the rifle from her jacket, and now sitting on the bench in the snow-covered lot outside the building. Her plan was to wait until Gordon emerged from inside the school. So she's actually, now if I was the neighbor, I'd think, maybe she didn't see her, I don't know. But if I had seen somebody do that, why in the world? That's not where your homework assignment would be. What's going on? I don't know. She's gonna wait till Gordon emerges, but soon she gets impatient. Her heart's racing, her hands are sweating, and asks Matthew Hone, a student who she saw heading towards the gym, to send Gordon out to talk to her. I hope she put her gun away, because that would be a sure sign that something was gonna go down. Oh, she didn't, and this is what she says. Spotting the rifle leaning up against the bench beside her, Hahn was somewhat skeptical. Well, yes, what are you going to do with that? He asked. Blow his brains out. Do that. Heather just chuckled. So I'm sure she's nervously laughing. He says, quote, she says, I don't even know how to load this thing. It was at that moment that Gordon Pickett and Chris Rico emerged from the gym. So now, with adrenaline pumping through her veins, she wasted no time on formalities. Without saying a word, she snatched up the rifle, shouldered it, and aimed at her former boyfriend, Gordon. Aware of what was about to happen, Chris bravely stepped in front of his friend, but if he thought that Heather would hesitate not to shoot him, too, he was tragically mistaken. She unleashed a hail of bullets, hitting both Chris and Gordon several times in the chest and the head. The boys collapsed into the snow, staining it with their blood. Heather then walked calmly away while less composed, sprinted towards the school building. When police and paramedics arrived on the scene a short while later, Heather, of course, was nowhere to be found. By then, Gordon Pickett was already dead, and Chris Rico was in critical condition. He was rushed to Madigan Army Medical Center, but would die later that night despite the best efforts of doctors. For now, though, the police had another problem on their hands: an obviously disturbed young girl wandering the streets with a semi-automatic rifle. An immediate search was launched for Heather Smith, who had been identified to police by Matthew Hone. However, Heather somehow managed to avoid her pursuers for several hours, until she walked back onto the school grounds, still carrying the rifle, with the grounds now crawling with officers, including a SWAT team. It is really uncertain why Heather returned to the place of the murder. Maybe she was giving herself up, I don't know. But if that was the case, she apparently had a change of heart at the last moment. As police officers surrounded her and ordered her to put the gun down, Heather responded with a shrill, "No, I won't," quote unquote. Then, before anyone could intervene, she put the rifle barrel to her head and pulled the trigger. As she collapsed to the ground, medics immediately rushed in to provide assistance, but it was too late. Heather Smith, fatally wounded, died on the way to the hospital. That is so tragic. A young, really bright, straight A girl, 14 years old. Straight A's, perfect. I just feel, because I know the emotional distress on, all young kids. Not that they should kill anybody, but it is too bad. That's too bad. It really is. So done. Story number two. Done. Steam Camp. It was just after dark on Good Friday, on April 6th, 2012, in the small town of craY in South Africa's Northern Cape province. Traffic was sparse on the streets. The town is not exactly renowned for its nightlife. Then out of the gloom, an Isuzu pickup emerged, traveling at high speed. Those who saw almost weekly basis, there are new reports of atrocities of rape, torture, and murder, of horrific acts perpetrated against the elderly, and even babies. Some have likened it to a genocide, and it does not help that government refuses to acknowledge the problem. Some radical politicians even call it justified retribution for the ills of the country's previous apartheid regime. So when the report came in of a triple homicide at the Steen Camp farm, it was initially assumed that the family had fallen victim to a farm attack. The police officers who headed out to the crime scene with a blood-spattered Don Steen Camp sitting in the back seat certainly believed this was what they would find. But as the short journey progressed, they began to second-guess their initial assessment. The teenager's demeanor just seemed wrong. For someone who had just lived through the trauma of finding his entire family murdered, he did not seem upset or distressed at all. In fact, he seemed excited, chatty. He was actually chatting away so fast about how he had, raced to the police station in his father's pickup truck. At one point, he even asked the police officers what steps he needed to take to inherit his father's property. Don Steenkamp owned several sheep farms in the area. That was sheep farms in the area, and his estate was said to be worth millions. The officers told Don that he had to speak to his father's lawyers about that. I'm sure their suspicions are now on high alert, and would only be heightened when they reached the farm and examined the crime scene. Don Steenkamp, his wife Crystal, and 14-year-old daughter Marthella were all dead, their bodies clustered together in the living room. They had each been shot twice in the head and once in the chest. The murder weapons were still at the scene. Don told the officers that he found them near the farm gate. They were a 22 caliber hunting rifle and a .357 revolver, both of them registered to Don Steenkamp. Now why would his father leave both of those firearms right outside the gate, or near the gate, if he knew that there were people that could and would come and attack his family? That would just give them more ammunition. So, to the police, this was another red flag. Farm attackers usually arrive heavily armed with automatic weapons. They seldom, if ever, discard firearms. These are too valuable and fetch a good price on the black market. So what they're saying here is that they would have stolen if they had actually found the firearms, whether inside the house or out by the gate, that they were too valuable for the criminals to just leave. They would have taken them with them. lasted mere minutes. The victims had not been tortured, and while an autopsy would later reveal that Marthella had been raped, Christelle had not. The police also found it strange that Marthella was fully clothed. Whoever had sexually assaulted her had dressed her afterwards. This also did not tally with a farm attack, where female victims are often displayed for maximum shock value. Even if the killers had for some reason forsaken their usual barbarism. In this case, why they had not ransacked the house? Nothing was misplaced, nothing but the firearms taken, only to be discarded later. Now, the Mr. Steedcamp kept $4,000 in his safe that was still there, which was very strange. So none of this is making any sense. If this had indeed been a farm attack, this kid did not do his homework at all. The other theory that some of the personal motive had far more traction. Don Steenkamp was well known and well respected in Quickquested. A deacon in the local Dutch Reformed Church, he was described as a, quote, a good Christian, end quote, generous and kind-hearted. He and his wife were said to live for their children. But Dion did appear to have anger issues, and this was prevalent around town. Other farmers gave him a lot of room or a wide berth when he was in a bad mood. Then anyone in the vicinity might fall foul of his caustic tongue, and even his wife and children. All in all, though, he was considered a good employer who paid better than any other farmer in the area and treated his workers well. But while Dion was well thought of in town, the same cannot be said for his son. The teenager was known to be arrogant, with a pronounced cruel streak. A farm worker had once seen him shoot one of his father's prize sheepdogs after she nipped at a puppy. So the son is the mean one. He actually shot one of his father's dogs, his prized dogs, because she nipped at a puppy. That's ridiculous. All dogs nip at puppies. He was also suspected of poisoning dozens of dogs in the town and to deny culpability or take account for it. So he did not deny that he had done it. According to him, he was justified in killing the animals, since they were being used by locals to track and steal his father's sheep. It was such a stretch to imagine that the arrogant, entitled teen and his hot-headed father might have gotten into an argument. So was it that far of a stretch? I don't think so. One that might turn deadly, though, in the end, was that of our stretch. In the deaths of 3 people, even his sister and his mother, the police did not think that it was a stretch at all, and the ballistics and forensics back that up. Within 2 weeks of the murders, Don Steenkamp was in custody, charged with 3 counts of murder, and with the rape of his sister. So he'd raped his sister. Brought to trial on June 2014. Scripps Ranch, which is a very beautiful area and the homes around there are gorgeous. They shared that home with 3 teenage daughters, Kimberly, Julie, and Heather, all of them adopted as infants. The family was happy, healthy, all-American. Jim and Becky loved the girls as their own and were rightly proud of their adopted daughter's achievements. But there was one dark cloud on the Diast's sunny horizon. While the older 2 girls had grown to be well-adjusted young women, 14-year-old Heather was a problem child. Undoubtedly bright, Heather was nonetheless inclined to surly, aggressive, and hostile behavior. She enjoyed testing boundaries. At times, she even pushed the infinitely patient Jim and Becky to their limits. She was also prone to self-harm, her arms marked by the numerous cuts she inflicted on herself, and she was a problem at school too. Recently, she had been expelled from the exclusive Christian college for propositioning another girl for sex. Jim and Becky, Heather was a difficult conundrum to solve. Although they were determined to help their daughter, getting through to Heather could be a challenge. Perhaps this was a product of the genes she had inherited. Both of her biological parents had suffered from mental problems, schizophrenia, and bipolar disorder, respectively. Was it any wonder that then when Heather started acting out? After discussing the issue, Jim and Betty decided to refer her to a specialist. An appointment was thus set up at the psychiatric unit of a local hospital. Aware that Heather would likely refuse to go, Jim had literally had to trick her into accompanying him. By the time she figured out their destination, it was too late to back out. Although angry, Heather reluctantly submitted to the barrage of tests. The outcome of those tests was as Jim and Becky had suspected. Heather showed signs of bipolar disorder and also suffering from depression. Fortunately, these are conditions that can be controlled with medication. Doctors assured the concerned parents that Heather could live a normal, fulfilled life as long as she took her pills. And just as in many cases, the problem was that Heather refused to take the medication, sparking a renewed series of rows with her parents, especially with Rebecca. Heather resented the fact that she had been tricked into seeing the doctor. In her mind, her parents only wanted her to take the pills so that they could turn her into a mindless zombie who they could easily control. She dismissed their assurances that they only wanted what was best for her. In fact, Heather had by now decided that the only way out of her current situation was to murder the people who had raised and nurtured her. Over the weeks that followed, she frequently ranted to friends about clubbing her mother to death with a baseball bat. But nobody took her seriously was doing more than just making empty threats. She was thinking seriously about acting on her violent impulses. All that it would take was one spark to set her off. It came on the afternoon of May 24th, 2008. That was the day that Becky returned early from work, entered her daughter, her 14-year-old daughter's bedroom, and caught Heather engaged in a sex act with one of her girlfriends. Becky, of course, ejected the girl from the house and therefore reprimanded Heather for her behavior. That sparked, obviously, a huge fight between mother and daughter and led to Heather spending the rest of the afternoon sulking in her room. She did not even come out for dinner. She was so pissed. By later that evening, though, the teen seemed to have calmed down. She even joined Becky on the couch to watch some television and seemed surprisingly affable. Neither she nor her mother brought up the earlier argument, and they spent a pleasant hour together. Becky probably thought that things had been resolved between them, but she was dead wrong. Inside, Heather was pissed, seething with rage. At around 4 a.m. on the morning of May 25th, 2008, Heather doused, got out of bed, put on a hoodie over her pajamas. She headed down the stairs, picking up an aluminum baseball bat on her way out of her bedroom. She walked out into the kitchen, into the backyard, to an old tree stump and started swinging the bat, crashing it repeatedly and again against the bark. But this was not working for her. It was not helping to relieve her anger. The bat was unwieldy. She needed something that could conceal a hammer, perhaps. She found one hanging from the tool rack in the garage and stuffed it into the pouch of her hoodie. Then she went to the kitchen and sat down on one of the stools at the breakfast bar. The sun wasn't even up yet, but that did not bother Heather. She would wait. She knew that Becky was always the first to enter the kitchen in the morning. Today Heather would have had a surprise waiting for her. It was just before 8 a.m. when Becky made her entrance, yawning, dressed in her nightgown. She greeted her daughter and remarked that she was up early and that she looked tired. Her mother asked, quote, "Couldn't you sleep?" unquote, honey. Heather did not reply, but she did respond when Becky asked if she had taken her pills. Quote, "I'm not taking them anymore," unquote, she said in a deadpan voice. Then before Becky even could voice a response, she was off the stool, rounding the counter, honing in on her mother. Becky still had her back turned when the first blow connected with her skull. Quote, "What are you doing?" unquote, Becky screamed before Heather struck her again, spilling her to the floor. Then Heather was on her, swinging wildly with the hammer, striking her again and again. Meanwhile, Jim Dost had been roused by the screams and came running towards the kitchen. Barely able to comprehend what was happening, he entered the fray, dragging Heather away from his wife, suffering a blow from the hammer as a result. He nonetheless managed to pull Heather away to wrestle the hammer from her grip and pin her down. she suffers from mental problems that she likely inherited from her biological parents, unquote. Jim would pay all of his daughter's legal fees and would stand by her throughout the trial, even making an impassioned appeal for leniency during the sentencing phase. Tried as an adult, Heather was looking at life in prison without parole before she struck a deal with prosecutors and agreed to enter a guilty plea to second-degree murder. In January 2010, she was sentenced to 16 years to life. The first 2 years of that sentence would be served as a juvenile at a juvenile detention facility in Ventura County. In 2012, the now 18-year-old Heather Doused was transferred to the adult correction system. Heather will be 30